Good afternoon. Well, it's not afternoon yet, is it? But it feels like afternoon. Because I was stuck in traffic so long getting here. I should have been here an hour ago. At Don Valley Parkway, I mean, it really is a parking lot, and the only thing that's missing is meters so you can pay. So have a nap on the side of the road without being towed away. I'm telling you, it's just unreal. Anyway, I'm glad I'm here, and it's nice to see everyone. I just want to get an idea of who's in the room in terms of backgrounds. How many people in the room are sort of designers? Architects? Oh boy, okay, lots of those. Anybody, any building owners in here? There's a few building owners, that's great. How about people from condominium corporations? Anybody from a condo corporation here? No, it's not a full-time job, that's the problem. It's all volunteer, right? It's like volunteer firefighters. They only meet when the roof is finally caved in and the water is leaking. Okay, I'm trying to think if there's any other engineers. How many engineers in the room? There's a few engineers, that's great. Students? No, it's wondered. Sometimes you get the odd keener. Okay. And are there any developers in the room? I guess not, eh? I can see why they wouldn't attend this session. Really? Do you know what I mean? It's like somebody from the Toronto Maple Leafs attending a hockey awards banquet. Like, what the hell would they be doing there? All right, let's get this thing going, and I'll hopefully have enough time for questions. I'll go as fast as I can, because I think for most of you in the room, you probably know this, but what's more probably interesting is to have the discussion afterwards. So this is work I've done over a number of years, and that's what the talk is based on, and I'm just going to talk about some basic things here, like why glass facade condos and glass condo performance problems, because some people really aren't aware of all the performance problems, the pathology of window wall enclosures, how they actually go through their life cycle and age and what happens. Life cycle implications of window wall enclosures, a lot of people don't see that because they don't think they're going to be around very long in their condo, and then of course what's next. So that's what we're going to look at. I'll have a question period, and you can ask me any skill testing questions you want. And I'll hang around afterwards as well, in case you don't get to ask the questions you would like. Well, you know, this is Toronto, and it's starting to look like condo land, of course. Now, I think today, last time I checked, I think it was a week ago, we have officially 168 cranes on the horizon in the GTA. 168 cranes. We're really, really going. And you can see that there's all kinds of action going on, and there's a corridor in which all the activity is occurring. It's along the lake shore and along Lake Ontario, and then it goes all the way up to North York, sort of following Yonge. It sort of seems to follow the subway line, and this where all kinds of buildings are being built. And then there's the image down below, probably not that clear, but it gives you an idea. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to change because even more stuff is going to get jammed in there. They're going to get it to the point where there's not going to be any daylight penetration from one place to another. It won't even matter that you have a glass condo because you'll be shadowed all the time. They discovered the same phenomenon, by the way, in Hong Kong. They ended up, saying, gee, nice building, too bad we don't have a view except of another building, and too bad we don't get any sunlight in here. But, I mean, other than that, it's okay. So somehow they say it's okay to do this, and it's desirable, and we'll see. I don't think I will, because I don't think most of us, well, some of you in the room will live long enough to see this, but it'll take about 30, 40 years for the chickens to come home to roost completely. Then we'll discover whether it was a good thing or not. So they're coming in all shapes and forms, these different condominium buildings, and they have different market sectors. And you'll notice that the market sectors change. And the reason I'm showing these different images is that at the sort of high end, they tend to be more mid-rise buildings, and they tend to look more like punched windows with actually solid walls, because they're selling very expensive condominium units to people that have a lot of money. And when you sell stuff to people that have a lot of money, they can afford good lawyers. So you have to really be careful what you sell them. Okay? You don't have to worry about that when you're selling it to somebody who's just barely scraped together 10% down payment to get into a $300,000 condo. They have no money left for even a Subway sandwich, never mind getting a lawyer. So there's a difference. So then they go to the low end of the denominator, the common denominator. They go, okay, what are we going to do? So if you're going to build a swank glass condo tower, you're going to go the really high-end curtain wall system. But of course, normally, 99% of the time, you're going to go with a curtain wall system. And curtain wall systems are at the bottom of the pile, so to speak, when it comes to performance and quality. So that's just something to understand about what's happening in the Toronto market, in case you're not familiar. Why glass facade condos? Well, everybody always asks me that question because they say, you've been studying these things probably more than anybody from a certain perspective. And so what's the scoop? I think this picture sort of takes what I call a sort of a quasi-humorous perspective on why. Let me just tell you some of the things, okay? It's called Condonomics 101. Just so you know. Now, this is stuff that, because, I've been studying housing actually since I was a graduate student in the 90s, so it's been a long time. And but there's interesting things a lot of people. The average size of apartments in Toronto has decreased by about 1/3 since the 1960s. Okay, they're small. When in an old building that was built in the 1960s, when I was a student, graduate student, came to Toronto, I rented a one-bedroom apartment. It was 950 square feet. One bedroom. I couldn't furnish it. I didn't have enough money. It took me 2 years to furnish that thing, and mostly from, junk I was picking up off the curb. So it was giant. I'm telling you, I could almost play tennis in the living room. They've been shrinking ever since, just so you know. Condominium apartment sizes have been steadily decreasing since the 1990s. So when they first came out with condos, the very first condos, really late 70s, early 80s, that came out in Toronto, were actually high-end apartment buildings, and they were big. Because they were worried they wouldn't sell unless they made them big, like, 3-bedroom and extra space, lots of closets. Well, they discovered after they could get away with a lot of stuff. The floor-to-ceiling glass enhances the perception of spaciousness and daylighting. So when you have small little apartments and you have to give them that look of they're big, well, the glass helps. Just because when you're viewing it from when you come in to look, you go, oh, look at that, It's one of those things. It's the old trick that's been played. And the window wall systems involve a single trade simplifying coordination. So imagine that. You have one throat to choke if you're the developer. You hire this guy, you say, listen, you're doing the whole enclosure. The guy goes, you mean you want this whole thing done in my crappy window wall system? And you go, yeah, that's what I want you to do. And cheap, too, and fast. Really fast. And you say, okay, I'll do it. And you have no competition, okay? Like, no other trade's going to get in your way. It's all yours. You just start and go. And, okay, so now you understand why they picked the system, eh? Window walls cost much less than curtain walls or punched window systems. Well, it's true, the curtain walls are engineered systems. The punched windows means you have to have some kind of a solid wall. That means you have to use a mason or somebody, precast. There's other trades involved, and coordination costs more money. So, again, that's the other thing. And then the developer, under the rules in Ontario, Tarion, only has to warranty window walls against water leakage for 2 years. Now imagine getting a warranty for 2 years on your enclosure against water leakage. I mean, that's the strong teeth that Tarion has on warranties in the province of Ontario. That's the protection they're giving consumers. A whole 2 years against water leakage. Like, wow. You know what I mean? That's like saying to somebody, listen, that pair of socks that I'm selling you, if between the first day you put them on to the first day you launder them, if they happen to wear out and you get a hole in them, they're not warranted. Sorry. That's all the time we're giving you on those socks. One wearing, and that's it, and you throw them out, okay? So we're going to give you that kind of level of protection. A lot of people, they don't want to hear this stuff, but I tell them, I say, it's for your own good. Now, the MERB formula has been going on forever, okay? Now, my good friends at RDH Engineering in BC, we've always talked about this because I've studied these things and they've studied these things, and it's the same old formula. And I just have to explain what the MERB formula works like. Basically, we've been building these things the same since the late 1950s when we started, okay? The technology fundamentally has not changed in its fundamental idea. And I just want to explain to you very simply what goes on. You've got a building that basically has a corridor down the middle. That's what they call a double-loaded corridor. In other words, there's doors on each side of the corridor. So the building suites are on one side of the building or the other side of the building. There is no cross-ventilation. There is no daylight penetration from the other side of the building unless you have a corner suite. So you understand what I'm talking about? You pump fresh air into the hallway and you hope, you draw arrows of hope that are on this, that the air will find its way underneath the space of the door that's connecting the suite to the hallway. That is your fresh air supply. And you have this continuous exhaust fan in the bathroom that is sucking air out. Unfortunately, most of the air is not coming from the hallway. It is actually coming through the building enclosure because the building enclosure is so leaky because it's a cheap window wall system. Okay? So it is not working according to the way the drawings show. But the people at City Hall keep accepting it because they've been doing it for so long, and they're not the most imaginative people when it comes to plans approval, because that's not really their job in life. Their job in life is to make sure it meets the code minimum. So we have to go back and blame the code for even allowing such a silly system, because I'll tell you what happens. People put weather stripping at the bottom of their doors because they don't want the cockroaches coming in. The air supply is now shut off. Study after study that CMHC did. Where did all the fresh air end up? It ended up in the elevator shaft. Best indoor air quality in the whole building. In the mechanical room of the elevator shaft, all the fresh air goes up there. And the second path is the, guess what? The fire stairs. Fire stairs are supposed to be smoke-proof. How is the fresh air going in there? Who's enforcing the air tightness requirements on fire stairs for safety? No one even measures those. Did you know that? That no one even measures them. You pay all that money for a building permit, nobody requires that you measure them. So this is this thing that we've been building forever. And they're made out of concrete, and fortunately not much happens in the way of fires, so that's good, but it's bad. I mean, bad is really a mild term. So the way these things work here is you got the double-loaded corridors with poor daylighting and natural ventilation. Shear walls act as demising walls, so there's no adaptability. The cheapest way to build these things is just use all the walls that separate the suites. They become your shear walls, because that way you have a cheap structure. It's basically like a bunch of orange crates all put together in reinforced concrete. But at the same time, now you can't move these walls. So if you had column and capital, old style building, you would have a block wall in between the suites. Well, heaven forbid that hey, I'm only selling this thing for $550 to $600 a square foot, this condo. I can't afford to have a mason put a block wall in between two suites. No, that's way too much money. I'm not making enough money. Okay, fine. So don't do it that way. Then that means everything that you see is the way it is. Unless you want to go and get x-rays of the rebar and the shear wall. Can I cut through? Can I make it? This is the adaptability issues are insane. But it's cheapest way to form and pour because it's the same cookie cutter floor after floor after floor. Hallway serves as fresh air, makeup air, plenum, poor mechanical ventilation effectiveness, for sure. People constantly complain of indoor air quality problems. Inefficient enclosure with projecting balcony slabs, poor thermal comfort and resilience. And that's the real issue because that's what happens. So now you've got all of these issues coming together and it's not so good. So if you want to know why Condonomics 101 works and so on, I still think this sort of says it all. It says follow the money. Okay, so this guy here, that's his line on Murdoch Mysteries, follow the money. It's the cheapest thing you can get away with. It is the most minimum of minimums. It is like someone who says, what's the passing grade? And they go, you need 50% to pass, and they get 50.01%, and they go, that's it. And you sit there and go, you're going to be my brain surgeon. 50.01%. I'm really excited. Okay, so let's talk about glass condo performance problems. Durability, of course, is huge. Water and air leakage problems are widely reported, and we already know, there's things I can't even talk about because, my colleagues tell me I can't even tell you because I would be, violating client privilege, and there's people that are suing people, and it's crazy already. And these buildings, in some cases, haven't even hit the 5-year mark. So there's deterioration of interior finishes, propagation of mold, not good. Comfort. People have a really hard time gaining comfort in many of the suites, both in winter and summer. Winter, too cold. You're looking at an R2 enclosure. Like R2 enclosure is like being inside of 2 cardboard boxes as a street person. I'm serious. I always tell people, do the calculation. Like it's R2, That's between you and the outside world. Toronto, February, -30, R2. And you got this conductive slab that's going across the building, and you can put a case of beer on it and pre-chill it. And people say, why don't you just put out in the balcony? You say, because if you fall asleep watching the Leafs, the beer might freeze, and then you've lost on 2 counts. So, you got to understand. I have this sense of humor because I was one of those people that was fortunate. I grew up in the cultural metropolis of Sudbury, Ontario, and you know, we saw hockey through a different lens, and beer especially. So the comfort issue is huge. In summertime, you just can't maintain comfort either because the glass expanses are too big for the cool. They put the same fan coil unit in every suite. It's one of those things. It's like you get the same as everybody else. You know what I mean? And but that sometimes you have a corner suite that's got a lot of glass. It's facing west. They don't, you know, people say, "What's going on?" I'm just running this thing 24/7. It's hot in here. So this is common. I know I've talked to people who have rented these. They always said, "Boy, am I ever glad I just rented this place for a few months while I was trying to figure out where to live in Toronto because I would never ever buy this thing. It's just a disaster." Sorry. Finally, the resilience issue. During extended power outages, glass facade condos have poor resilience. It's true. They don't hold the heat because of that, and very soon they become uninhabitable. And that happened on two different occasions. One, we had the big blackout in the summer, and within 45 minutes, people had to leave the building because it was so hot that they couldn't breathe. And, you know, they were lucky they had operable windows. There were people in office buildings had it worse because they couldn't open windows. They had to get out like right away. And then in this last year's ice storm, there were people that never made it past one day. After 24 hours, they had to leave because they could see their breath in their suites. So, you know, this is what you get. And like I say, as the developer says, so what do you expect for $550 a square foot? You know, like what did you expect? You should have spent more. You know, I would have given you a marble countertop. Then it would have been nice and cold for you to lay on. When after you die, they can come and do a post-mortem. Window wall enclosures are prone to leaks. Well, it's true. I mean, you know, this is a typical example of how these things are put together. You look at this thing. You show this to somebody. Say, this is how your building is being put together. You look at all the fingerprints, the scratches, the imperfections, the undulation of the concrete, the lack of a good seal. Like, the whole thing is just garbage. Like, for the money you're paying, you should be able to, for that kind of money per square foot, you should get something that comes out that performs like a Ferrari. But no, you're getting something that's like a Pinto. You know what I mean? A rusty old Pinto. So these things are bad. They're prone to leaks. They've been known for that forever because they were developed really as a storefront application, one story, not to go into big pressures back and forth. They were never designed for that. And not for huge, huge expanses, endlessly expanding, contracting, expanding. They weren't meant for that. But somebody said, you know, we could adapt them for that. It's true, you can. So the workmanship, materials, and installation conditions are imperfect. This is really important to appreciate. And the window walls are face-sealed enclosures that depend on a perfect seal to deliver acceptable control against air and water leakage. So this image here should show you what goes together. Like on the left-hand side, you've got a typical curtain wall, which is a completely engineered system, and of course it gets installed and then there's a warranty supplied by the manufacturer. So you can see why so many architects like to go, if they can, with a curtain wall system, because they get to pass the liability on to the other guy. Which is good, because architects don't make the money they used to make, right? From the 1960s, well, in the 1960s, architecture was amongst the top 2 paying professions in Canada in the 1960s. But now they've fallen to the point where it's I don't know where you stand. Engineers haven't done much better. There's a development industry that's intent on beating the hell out of us and getting us to compete against each other to the point where we've narrowed our fees down to the only way you're going to make money is if you can actually trick a guy into giving him the same set of plans twice and invoicing him. And then later he discovers he only built one building. That's about the only way you're going to make money nowadays. So, and people joke, but I tell people that because a lot of times, you know, I have friends of mine, I go to parties, people say, well, you know, you teach in an architecture school. I go, yeah, I do. I said, but I try to warn the students to run while they still can. Like, you should, this is not a business for you. Like, if you, like, it's different. Like, if you, I always ask the question, I said, did you marry rich? And some of them say yes. I say, okay, good, then it'll be a nice hobby. Do you come from a rich family? Oh, yeah, well, yes, I do come from it. I said, well, that's good, because then you'll have lots of people you can design for, and you'll give you something to do, you know? And you won't turn into an alcoholic that's popping pills. So these are because a lot of rich people fall into these things. They have too much time in their hands. So in that sense, it's very nice. It's like painting. It's like taking a degree. It gives you something to do. You know what I mean? But if you're talking about somebody making a viable existence, like trying to have maybe a wife and kids, 3, 4 kids, putting them through university, you look at them and you go like, well, you're going to have your kids awfully old in life. I mean, and it's going to be tough. So I'm just realistic, and it shouldn't be like that because it's different in other parts of the world. But here is, and particularly the GTA, it is cutthroat. So then look at this one on the side. Now what they did, it's interesting, you know, somebody got the idea to make these things work because they said, well, we'll take the storefront type windows, which are really windows for punched openings, and then we'll mull them together. That's what mullions do. They mull together windows, and that's really the thinking. And then they end up putting this little angle affair, which is great for thermal bridging, by the way, at the edge. So these are pictures that my students give me. I say to my students, if you have any good pictures, bring them in about condo enclosures. And look at that. The frost penetration on the inside. And already mold on it. So, you know, this is what we're talking about. And these are supposed to be fairly high standard condos. But like, why is there so much frost on the inside in Toronto? Because it's a big thermal bridge, that's why. Then I have my colleague in Ottawa who is doing a major study. And they went to all kinds of new condominiums in the Ottawa area. And they're still in the process of analyzing. He said, I'll just give you some of the ones. And he says, the condensation problems are huge. He says, these people gave us permission to go into their suites. We got to take pictures. We got to do, you know. So there's so much evidence here. Like it's to the point where, you know, it's sad. It's sad because, okay, fine. I've always made the joke to people that we'll just get good at building condos when we no longer build them anymore because we'll have filled out all the lots with the crappy ones and there's no land to build on after. So then we'll know how. Like, we'll be wise after the event. I don't know if that's the way to be. And these things, and these are all the ones, like none of these are, if you think these have thermal breaks at the, I want to see the detail. I want to see it. And I want to go there and I want to get some thermography right there on that detail in the middle of it. I want to see how it glows. And then I want somebody, because I always tell people, just because you call something a thermal break, it doesn't mean that it's a thermal break. Just because you put it, you know, you might as well like put on your notes on the side of your enclosure details, weatherproof, air leakage proof, water leakage proof enclosure assembly. And it's like, just because you write that, do you think that Mother Nature is going to say, oh, okay, I won't go in there. I will not leak into your, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I apologize for being so nasty all these years. Less than 48 hours, you're out. Now, colleagues of mine in New York City, where they have same issues, it's funny how all this area of the American Northeast, Canadian Great Lakes, same thing, same climate. Look, what happens? When you have a high-performance enclosure, you go almost 7 days. This was all stuff that they had monitored and also did some simulation on. And it's a beautiful piece called Baby, It's Cold Inside. It's the Urban Green Council of New York. And there were places, the typical buildings, within the end of day 2, they were already having to leave. People said, I can't stay here, it's too cold, but I don't know where I'm going to go. That's the problem. Like, when you have a city the size of New York, you know, evacuating a city like that or trying to find a place for somebody to stay warm is difficult. It's one thing when you have a town of 500. You got to maybe put 200 or 300 people up here and there. You got, you know, 20 million people. What do you do? You know what I mean? It's tough. And so that's a big problem that we have. Because climate change is going to make for worse things yet. And our building stock is not resilient. So we need to change the game, obviously. But how do you do that when the building code is like that? But anyway, I want to talk to you about the pathology of window wall enclosures, because whether the people put a thermal break on the edge of the slab now or not, there's other issues that deal with leakage, and I have colleagues of mine that are professionals in the building science field and enclosure and cladding engineers, and they're involved in situations that I can't speak of buildings that are leaking today and that aren't that old. So I want to tell you how it more or less goes if you want to know what the pathology is like. So water and air leakage is usually detected within the first 5 years, and it's on a repair as required basis. This is the pathology. Between 5 and 10 years, water and air leakage increases. Resealing of window wall system is usually required. At that point, you're usually looking at, going back to the condominium owners saying we need some money, special assessment. By year 20 to 25, UV degradation and thermal cycling requires major retrofit or replacement. We haven't got to that yet. That's coming. You'll be hearing about that later today. People aren't studying this because they got nothing better to do with their time. They're studying it because they're saying we know it's coming. These building enclosures are going to have to get major retrofits or replacements. We're trying to figure out ways of doing that. We're starting to think about it now because that's one of the things that engineers try to do, try to be proactive. Major retrofit has 10 to 15 year service life, just so you know. That's about as far as it gets because it's a face sealed system. And replacement system service life will depend on quality of technology and workmanship. So that's another issue. Depends who did it, how well they did it. So compared to curtain walls and punch window enclosures, you see, it's a significantly higher life cycle cost. But nobody knows that when they're buying buildings because we don't educate people about what to look for when they're buying a condo. We really don't as a society. We tell them more about what they need to know to buy a fridge or a stove or a television or a car, but not about condos. Because the condo industry, in fact, the entire development industry, in fact, engineers and architects, myself included, don't spend enough time doing public education about the importance of building infrastructure in our society and how to look for value. And we have ourselves to blame. Because at least the other folks out there, like in the medical industry, 30 years ago, they were jumping up and down and saying, don't smoke cigarettes, you should exercise, get that crap junk food out of the school cafeterias. They were telling people the truth about health. But we as a profession altogether, we don't want to tell people the truth. We don't want to talk about all of this. It's uncomfortable. Makes us feel like, well, so what are you doing? What kind of ethical approach do you have? Well, I'm part of this industry. So people always say, oh, yeah, you're crapping on everybody. Well, you know what? I'm crapping on myself, too. You think I feel good about this? That's why I come here and talk about these things. I'm trying to raise awareness so people understand that, hey, if we keep going like this, Toronto's going to be horrible. A horrible place, especially downtown. So this is one of the things I just want you to understand. These things go together in all different ways. And if you see them, I mean, I've watched these things go up. I've seen guys properly seat it with a good stiff kick of the old heel of the construction boot. Real technique we're talking, eh? Workmanship, like good old-fashioned workmanship. And all of these things have to be sealed. This is the thing. This is what building science teaches you. It's odd. So look at what it says here. If a baseball player who hits .350 gets paid millions of dollars a year, what can we expect the batting average to be for a construction worker paid tens of thousands of dollars a year? You pay a guy $5-6 million a year. He gets on base 35% of the time. Hire a structural engineer with a 35% batting average. 65% of his buildings collapse. Would you use his services? But you pay millions to a guy and now you go to a guy that you're paying $70,000, $80,000 a year, you say, every seal will be perfect. You're going to bat 1,000. Like you're dreaming. You have to design systems that are forgiving. You have to pick technologies that defy bad workmanship and imperfect materials. That's what redundancy is all about. So there are better systems. There are better ways to go. But this is just courting disaster because the odds of you getting a perfect, if all you had to do was one suite, and that was the whole condo project, you could probably perfectly seal that one. But you're not going to do the whole thing. And they go up fast. That's the other thing. A lot of people don't realize. You go on a project, you see how fast this stuff flies up, and I don't know if they're checking everything perfectly. I know one thing for sure, they're not testing the tightness as they go. There's no quality assurance on site. These things fly. And then some of the details, like, when I talk to my colleagues, I always say to them, I need something that's like, and the guy, well, here's one, you look at this detail, how that thing wraps around. You tell me, long term, how you're going to go in there and reseal that when the seal fails. You can't even get at it. I don't even know how you can install it properly. Who thought of this? They don't care. Slap it up. Put lots of goop. It's only a 2-year warning. After that, it's over. Don't worry about it. We're gone. We're on to another project. And so it goes. And boy, it's not going to look good in a while, because these things, once they start to leak, look shabby on the inside too. So that's my question. How do you seal thousands of kilometers of joints perfectly? That's what happens when you pick window wall. Even if you could get a window wall system that had superior thermal performance, the air and water leakage would still get you. Okay? You have to understand, it's an odds thing. It's not more sophisticated than that. So what are the life cycle implications? Well, you can see that all glass buildings are there, and they have big problems there after somewhere in the 10 to 20 year range. Now, this is all data that's been gathered across North America, so it's at average, but it just shows you what's going on. And different things, roof, elevators, windows, plumbing. So window walls are just one notch ahead of roofing, right? In terms of, and we've always picked bad roofing in Canada as a rule as well. We always pick cheap roofing because you can't see it. So just to give you an idea. So this is just to give you an idea of what's going on. So cheap enclosures are expensive. They are. So you should see what happens when you have to do these. So these are just some estimates that Lloyd Alter put together after I'd been on the CBC talking about glass condo conundrum, because of the fact that, hey, that we're going to have this issue in Toronto where we'll have taken all of the prime building locations in the downtown, and we're going to build all of these buildings that are all of a sudden all at one time, because they're all built at one time, are all going to become shabby at one time. And then, so I always tell people that's the future slums of Toronto. You're looking at them. Those are your districts. That's what happens to buildings if they get run down too far and you can't do anything with them. They don't maintain their value. They end up being turned into rentals. You rent to whoever will pay the rent, and the cheaper the rent, the way it goes. And that's what you're filled with. That's the issue. And why? Well, this is a very conservative estimate. Owner of a 700 square foot unit would have to pay about $50,000 to cover the cost of doing a new enclosure on their building. $50,000. And they have to move out while it's happening. I don't know what that costs on top of that. How do you keep people in the building? How do you keep the water out of a suite that's on the 30th floor when you've got the whole enclosure ripped off because you're putting a new one on? Think about the logistics. These things I've thought about this. This is my business. This is what I do. I study the life cycle performance of buildings, the way doctors study human health I've been there. I don't know how many beers I've drank sitting there scratching my head saying, how the hell did you can't do it? If it was punched windows, you could change one punched window at a time. And people have done that in the older style buildings, but not when you use window wall. It's a tough one. But if somebody can figure it out, they're going to make a lot of money. So that's the good news. The good news is somebody might be rich, maybe even somebody in this room. So the other thing, people said, yeah, but you're forgetting about the architectural delight of all glass. So this is those same guys, the Urban Green Council guys, they're so empirical. They always sit there, they go, yeah, you can say whatever your theories are. Why don't we go out and do some random observations? They went out in New York, and they did all these districts, and they just went and they photographed buildings. So it's all empirical data. And it's a difference between hype and reality for sure. So on average, 59% of window area was covered by blinds or shades. Over 75% of buildings had more than half of their window area covered by blinds or shades. And it didn't really matter what was happening. That's what they found. Shaded window area does not depend on window direction or time of day. Right? So you go, and there's this big thing in there, yeah, and the wall, yeah, from floor up to ceiling, and glass, yeah, it's all cool. And then that's what you're looking at. So at the end of the day, no one's even enjoying it, because after a while people realize, hey, I'm like a goldfish in a bowl here. Everybody's looking at me. One building beside the other. Hey, why does everybody have those binoculars that were on sale at Canadian Tire last week? And why am I looking at a guy out of my binoculars who's looking at me out of his binoculars for? And what's going on here anyway? Why did I buy this place? Okay? So that's what they were trying to get across. So they're saying it's not just that it's costly to the tenants, but it's also costly to society, because one of the things that the energy modelers in this room know, these all-glass buildings, their peak energy demands for heating and cooling are huge, but particularly for cooling. And when you start adding hundreds of buildings in the downtown, you're stressing the infrastructure system. And the developers are not paying for that. That's the part that really bugs me. If they paid their way, if they paid their fair share, you'd say, okay, fine. But they're not. So now everybody that has a hydro user is going to have to pay to upgrade the amount of juice that comes into Toronto because all these buildings have huge high peaks. Okay? So just to let you know. So what's next? Hard to say. One thing for sure, we know buildings in the GTA are becoming more expensive. That's for sure. Right now it's construction costs about $210 per square foot. It depends how you want to count it. That's exclusive of land. Purchase price about $505 a square foot, and that's different prices that I could put together. These are averages, okay? I'm sure there's ones that cost more and ones that cost less. Detached housing, just to give you an idea, about $180 a square foot, and the purchase price is $330, just to give you an idea. So it seems to be more markup on condos. But they're not getting any cheaper, and no one is forecasting prices to drop. There's the odd person that is, but they also happen to be like standing on a corner and wearing a Leafs jersey outside of Maple Leaf Gardens and proclaiming that the world is going to end. But I don't see the prices dropping. So there's a lot of money in the kitty, so to speak. High performance punch windows are definitely going to be part of future design of better buildings because it's something you can deal with if the window doesn't work or you change the window. And you still get a nice view. You don't need floor to ceiling glass. This is a perfectly acceptable view. Everybody knows you get more than enough daylight, so why go with that other type of an enclosure system? Thermal breaks at balcony slab projections. Very important. People say it's too much money. It's not too much money. You should ask the condominium owner. The problem is they don't know what these things are. So they don't know if they want to pay for them or not. Because no one's told them. Imagine telling somebody in the sales office, oh yeah, your feet will be cold most of the winter when you're standing within 2 meters of the edge of this, like that's supposed to help sell the condo, right? So, but if you go for the thermal break, like we can give it to you for, $100 a meter is the cost to install it. People say that's a lot of money. You say, well, but you've only got 5 meters of balcony, $500. What's that on a $450,000 condo? Comfort, feet stay warm, you stand near the windows, bare feet, nice. What's wrong? That's why, well, you don't find that in the sales trailer. No way. They've got marble, different tiles, different types of cabinets. Dedicated ventilation system with energy recovery. They make these, even in Canada, they make these units. Most of them get exported to other parts of the world. We have the technology to give everybody their own ventilation system. We don't need those stupid pressurized hallways and all that issues, and we don't have to count on a leaky enclosure to bring air into our suites. So we have these things. And we can eliminate the use of shear walls as demising walls to enhance the flexibility and adaptability of condos. So we could be doing a better job, is what I'm trying to say. And none of these things are rocket science. Now, I was doing the Toronto Green Standard a number of years ago, and we organized a very nice system where we brought together developers, contractors, cost accountants, and energy modelers. And I was the guy that sort of headed it up. And we were going to do cost effectiveness studies. And so this money has been increased since I did that. That was back in 2008, and now it's 2015. So I had to inflate the numbers, but I'm just going to show you just what happens here in terms of what I call the high-performance condo value proposition. Cost of upgrading the enclosure in a typical condo, this is for the average amount of enclosure area that belongs to your condo, okay, and the HVAC system to go to this other system, because you already have a base system. You're only talking the incremental cost to go to an ERV, $10,000. That includes the thermal breaks in the balconies, higher performance walls and windows, and a dedicated ERV. $10,000. Typical average cost of a condo in Toronto, this was like 2 weeks ago when I put the last of this presentation together, $443,000. I went to the mortgage calculator to see what the difference was between 443 versus 453. I have talked to friends of mine in banking. I said, that's not a deal breaker in terms of whether I'm going to get a mortgage or not. And they said, no. They said 10 G's on 443 is nothing. I said, so I could be living, if somebody had told me, mind you, everyone would have had to agree. The $10,000 more per suite, I could have went to I'm not saying the best, but a much, much better system. That's what's sad about the story of glass condo towers. It's not like we didn't go there because it would have meant another $250,000 per condo. No, we're talking like this is when you see the pettiness of the amount of money, you realize what the greed is. And also when you're looking at the people buying it, the gullibility and the total lack of sophistication about understanding building technology. It's sad, but it's just the way it is. So they'd get a whole bunch of benefits. This is one of the, I was having a little studio there at U of T, and the students had done their analysis on condo buildings. They all came back and they said, we're going to do mid-rise designs. All of them are going to be single-loaded corridors because that's the only way you can get natural ventilation through. So you only have corridor on one side, which also acts as a porch on the back, and so all of them get flow through and the daylight penetration on both sides. And they said, well, that's probably the way we should do things. Well, when you go to certain places in the world, like Austria, you'll discover most of their stuff is built like that. People don't mind living in there. So we can do punched windows. And they're good. And you know, the other thing that the daylighting experts will tell you is after 40% window-to-wall ratio, you don't get that much more light into a building. After that, it actually becomes excessive. So think about that. And then think about what we did in the past. And you know, the candy lofts. People always say, what kind of a condo would you advise people to buy? I say, well, one of these. Go and look for the old converted buildings, the ones that have 2 feet of masonry walls and punched windows. Because you can control your costs if there's issues with the enclosure. If there's a leaky window, it's the one window. You don't have to replace the whole system. You've got something that's got a lot of thermal mass in it. Chances are if the heat goes down, you probably stay there for a week before the heat leaks out of everything. They're tough buildings. They have very low monthly carrying rates. I've been studying that too. Because people always ask me, they say, what would you do? And I'm not against the condominium idea. It's just, you know, but give people something that has a better value. So this is the whole life cycle thing. Buildings, cities. You think about if you want to be a responsible developer and you want to do stuff for your city, for your community, for your country, you want to be able to build in some kind of cultural biodiversity into your building stock, right? Traditionally, what we used to do is build buildings with good bones. Very, very tough buildings, adaptable, robust, and they could accommodate many cycles of change. Like that Candy Loft is an idea of that. There's a whole bunch of buildings in Toronto. They're in their 3rd and 4th life in some cases. You can go look at Gooderham and Wirtz in the Distillery District. Tough buildings, over 100 years old. They have 3-4 different uses, and they're good buildings. But they got run down because they did. But the trick is to have a building that's so robust that you can run it down but then bring it back, which you can't do with the new ones, unfortunately. So the robust buildings did get run down, and then this decay fosters new growth for less affluent inhabitants. That's the cycle of how cities work. You have an area that gets seedy, it gets run down, but that's good because now you have a niche in the ecology, in the cultural ecology, where people can get in, and then eventually, as the market and demographics shift, they become rehabilitated and/or retrofit, otherwise known as gentrification. I remember when I first came to Toronto, visit my brother, who was studying at the Royal Conservatory, and it was 1972, and it was like Cabbagetown was just at the beginning of starting to become gentrified. It was the cheapest place to live. Like, it was so cheap to live there. It's different today, isn't it? It's been gentrified. So these are the natural sites, but the buildings had good bones, and the entire cycle begins anew. That's what you want to do, be able to cycle through. So history shows that buildings conforming to this healthy model acceptably accommodate at least 3 generations of inhabitants before needing significant restoration and rehabilitation. That's what you sort of need to shoot for. You're looking at about a 60-year life cycle. Okay, a good example of that is Toronto's older high-rise tower apartment buildings. They did a full 50 to 60 years of service before they need to be retrofit. They now start to need to be retrofit, but see how well they served society for such a long period of time. So glass facade condos do not conform to this sustainable life cycle because the DNA of their form, armature, and fabric is not sufficiently robust and adaptable. That's been my argument right from the beginning. I just tell people, I don't care what you say about what, I'm just telling you right now, these things are not going to have the same performance on a long-term basis, and they're not going to be a cultural asset. I won't live long enough to find out if what I'm saying is true. Most of the people that tell me I'm full of shit aren't going to live that long either. So it'll be very interesting at some point in time. Somebody's either going to look and say, that guy was a complete nut basket, U of T, or they're going to say,
he was so right on, it's too bad nobody listened. I don't know which it's going to be. You know, I'm not worried about that, because in a few days, I'll be up north fishing for pickerel, having a beer, and not having to worry about looking at water leakage in glass condo towers. So the thing you have to understand then, to sustainability, which is what we're trying to get to, is about evolution. And the buildings that we have don't evolve. The new glass condo towers, they're not designed to evolve. In fact, we don't even design all the new buildings that way. But think about this. Think about designing your building with a view that the bones are going to be solid and the armature will be there for 200 to 300 years. Designed right from day one so that the enclosure can be retrofit. Think about that the same way that the automotive manufacturer thinks that those tires are going to wear out, and you know what? I don't want the person to take 3/4 of the car apart to change the tires. I'm going to design a system where 5 bolts, boom, boom, it's done. You sit there and go, yeah, now that, if we know that the skin is what's going to go, and we know the structure is going to last for hundreds of years, because the HVAC systems are designed to go in and out, see? Because they know they don't last. But for some reason we think, that's it, we do the enclosure, it's going to be there for 150 years. It's not. Not unless we want to go back to the old ways of punched windows. And then, even then, we might not succeed because we don't have the buffer.